Hey Reddit, I've been sitting on this story for a while, and I figured it's time I share it. Honestly, I still can't believe how everything played out. I don't even know where to start, but I guess I'll just dive right in. The whole thing feels like something straight out of a movie, and I'm not even sure if I've fully processed all of it yet. My name is Oliver. I'm 32 years old, and I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here I am. I've been married for 7 years to Claire, my wife, who I thought I knew better than anyone. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but whose is? We had our ups and downs, sure, but overall, I always felt like we had a solid foundation. Or at least, I thought we did. Let me start by telling you a little about how things were before all of this. Claire and I met when we were both in our mid-20s, and we hit it off right away. She was smart, funny, and incredibly beautiful. Honestly, I felt lucky. Our relationship was great for the first few years. We traveled together, built a life together, and even bought a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. To outsiders, we were the picture-perfect couple. But over the last couple of years, things started to change. Slowly, but surely, Claire became distant. She'd go out with friends more often, not come home until late, and even started working longer hours at her job, saying she was up for a promotion. I didn't think much of it at first. I trusted her, maybe a little too much. But then, a few months ago, something started to feel off. I began noticing small things that didn't add up. She was acting weird with her phone, locking it whenever I walked into the room, and she'd be constantly texting someone in private. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It's hard to explain, but you know that gut feeling? The one that tells you when things aren't as they seem? I tried talking to her about it a few times, but she brushed it off. "You're being paranoid, Ollie," she'd say, rolling her eyes. "I'm just busy. Work, friends, you know how it is." But I wasn't stupid. I knew something was going on. I started to do some digging on my own. That's when I found the email. I won't go into the full details of it because it's not really important right now, but basically, I stumbled across a conversation between Claire and one of her friends. In that email, she was talking about how she had been planning to end things with me for months and was waiting for the right moment to file for divorce. She had even gone so far as to ask for advice on how to go about splitting our assets. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. I was floored. I spent the next few days rereading that email over and over, trying to make sense of it. Was I really that blind? How had I missed all the signs? It felt like a punch to the gut. And the worst part? I knew she had been hiding things from me, but I never thought it would be something this big. This wasn't just about some minor disagreement or relationship problem anymore. This was about her wanting to take everything from me. Now, I'm not the kind of person who's going to just sit around and let someone walk all over me. I've always been a bit of a planner, call it cautious, call it paranoid, but I like to think ahead. So, after reading that email, I did something. Something I'm not proud of, but something that, looking back, was the right move. I moved my assets. I'm not talking about a few $100s here or there. I'm talking about our joint savings, my retirement fund, and some other investments I had been keeping under my name. I didn't touch anything of hers, of course, because I didn't want to get accused of taking everything, but I made sure to protect myself. I transferred most of it to an account I knew she wouldn't be able to access. It wasn't a huge amount, but enough to give me a cushion in case things went south. I didn't tell her a thing. I just waited. For the next couple of weeks, Claire kept up the charade. She was as cold and distant as ever, and the tension in our house grew thicker by the day. Every time we were in the same room, it felt like we were just going through the motions. I kept my distance, not saying much, waiting for her to make her move. Then, 2 weeks later, it happened. One evening, she came home after a late meeting, looking like she had been holding something in for a while. I could see it in her eyes. She was tense, almost jittery. She sat down across from me at the dinner table, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "We need to talk," she said, her voice unusually soft. At that moment, I knew what was coming. My heart was racing, but I kept my face calm. I wanted to see if she'd finally come clean. She took a deep breath and looked at me like she was preparing for something big. "Ollie," she started, her voice shaking slightly, "I've been thinking a lot, and I think it's time we end things." I felt a small sigh of relief. It wasn't exactly a surprise, but hearing the words come out of her mouth made it all feel real. "I've been planning this for a while," she continued. I've been waiting for the right time. I don't know how to say this, but I think I've been using you for far too long, and I don't want to keep pretending anymore." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. But I stayed calm. I just nodded, giving her nothing. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break down. I understand, I said, keeping my voice neutral. If that's what you want. She looked at me with this smug look on her face, like she had one. You know, I never thought you'd be this stupid, she said, leaning back in her chair. I was just using you, Ollie. You've been a nice little financial safety net for me, and I'm done with it. I've got everything set up. The lawyers are ready to go. I couldn't help but feel a rush of anger, but I held it in. The game was about to get real, and I wasn't going to let her see me sweat. I'm glad you're being honest, I said, barely able to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. She smirked, thinking she had the upper hand. Oh, don't worry. It'll be easy. You'll just have to sign a few papers, and then I'll be free. But that's when it happened. I'd been sitting on this for 2 weeks, and I was ready to watch the realization hit her. Slowly, I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. You're not as clever as you think, Claire, I said calmly. She raised an eyebrow, clearly confused. What are you talking about? I leaned back in my chair and let the silence hang in the air for a moment. Let's just say I took some precautions, I said, barely able to hide my grin. You may have been planning this, but I've been one step ahead of you. Her face slowly drained of color as the words sank in. I watched as the smirk faded from her face and she froze, her eyes wide. I didn't give her a chance to respond. I just stood up and walked out of the room. When I walked out of the room, I could hear her scrambling behind me. I knew she wasn't expecting me to say something like that, and I wasn't sure if she understood the gravity of what I meant. But I could hear it in her voice when she caught up to me in the hallway. Ollie, what are you talking about? What precautions? You're scaring me. I didn't turn around. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me waver. I just kept walking toward the door. I'm talking about the fact that I know exactly what you've been planning. All those little hints you've been dropping about wanting more for yourself and needing to focus on you. Yeah, I picked up on that. I turned around and looked at her for the first time since the conversation started. Her eyes flickered with confusion, and for a second, I could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to process what I was saying. But she wasn't quite getting it. What do you mean? You know? She asked, a nervous edge creeping into her voice. What did you do, Ollie? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let the silence drag on, making sure she felt the weight of it. Watching her panic made me feel like I had some control again, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Finally, I broke the silence. I moved my assets, Claire. I moved everything that matters. You think I didn't see this coming? Her face went from confusion to absolute panic. Her breath caught, and I could see her hands trembling slightly as she stepped back, her eyes wide. She blinked rapidly, like she was hoping the words I just said would magically disappear. What? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. What did you do? I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, watching the panic spread across her face. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it. It was like her mind was scrambling to figure out how I could possibly know what she was up to. And in that moment, I realized how little she'd actually thought this through. She was so caught up in her own plans that she hadn't even considered the possibility of me being prepared. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. You weren't the only one making plans, Claire, I said, my voice calm but laced with a hint of satisfaction. I've been making my own moves. And now, you're not going to walk away with everything you thought you would. She took a few steps toward me, looking almost frantic now. You don't get it. You can't do this, Ollie. You can't just take everything and leave me with nothing. I interrupted her. You think this is about leaving you with nothing? No, Claire. This is about protecting myself. You've been planning to take everything, but you didn't count on me fighting back. You didn't count on me being prepared. Her face went even paler, and I could see her hands shaking now. She opened her mouth to speak again, but the words were stuck. I could tell she didn't know what to say. She was completely off balance, caught off guard in a way I had never seen her before. I didn't think you'd actually do something like this, she whispered, her voice shaky. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I could take it all. I didn't know you'd actually move everything. I could see the panic rising in her now, and honestly, it felt good. After all the years of her playing these games, trying to control everything, I was finally in the driver's seat. And watching her struggle to regain control was almost satisfying. You should have thought of that before you started plotting behind my back, I said coldly. You should have known I wouldn't just sit here and let you walk all over me. Claire took a few steps back, clearly in shock now, her mind racing as she tried to process everything. I didn't mean it like that, Ollie, she said, her voice a mix of desperation and guilt. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I thought it was the only way out. I thought you'd be fine. I didn't think you'd be the one to fight back. I laughed, a little bitterly. Well, Claire, that's the difference between you and me. You were playing chess, but I was playing a much longer game. She froze when she heard that. For a second, I thought she was about to say something else, but then her face just went blank. It was like the realization finally hit her, the full weight of what she'd done, and now, what I had done in response. I could see her trying to keep it together, but the cracks were showing. The woman who always seemed so confident, so in control, was now standing there, completely rattled. She opened her mouth a few more times to speak, but each time she shut it again, like she couldn't quite find the words. Finally, she spoke again, but this time, it wasn't the same smug tone she had before. Her voice was low, almost pleading. Please, Ollie. I didn't mean for things to get this far. I don't want to lose everything. Please. The desperation in her voice almost made me feel bad. Almost. But then I remembered the email. The planning. The coldness with which she had been scheming to take everything from me while pretending everything was fine. I shook my head slowly, not buying it for a second. Don't try to act like you didn't know exactly what you were doing, I said, my voice low and steady. You've been playing this game, Claire. And now you're not going to win. She didn't say anything more for a few moments. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked defeated. I could tell she was scrambling to figure out how to handle this, but the truth was, I'd already won. She had underestimated me, and now, everything she had planned was falling apart right in front of her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence hung heavy in the air, and I could feel the tension crackling between us. I didn't need to say anything else. She knew what was happening now, and I wasn't about to make it easy for her. But then, just as I was about to walk away and let her stew in her own mess, she spoke again. I need to fix this, Ollie, she said, almost whispering. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Please, just don't do this. I'll fix everything. We can work this out. I turned to face her one last time, but this time, there was no satisfaction in my expression, just cold determination. You've already made your choice, Claire, I said flatly. And now, you're going to have to deal with the consequences. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, completely shattered. I made my way to the front door, my mind still spinning from the exchange. Claire was still standing there, but I didn't look back. I couldn't let myself be swayed by her pleading. This wasn't just a small disagreement or a minor issue. This was about protecting myself, about ensuring that I didn't get caught in the mess of her selfishness. I stepped outside and took a deep breath of the crisp air. It felt refreshing, almost like I was breathing for the first time in a long while. For years, I had been the one caught up in her manipulations, her constant back and forth. I was always the one being pulled into her drama, trying to solve problems she'd caused. Now, it was my turn to make the decisions. I had already put my assets in place, safeguarded everything from the house to my business investments. It wasn't about being petty, it was about protecting what I had worked for. I had no idea how far Claire was willing to go to get what she wanted, but I wasn't going to give her the chance to ruin everything I'd built. The sound of my phone vibrating broke my train of thought, and I pulled it out of my pocket to see a text from her. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, trying to decide whether or not I should open it. It had been a few minutes since we'd had that confrontation, and I already knew what she was trying to do. Smooth things over. Apologize. Manipulate her way out of this. I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it, but curiosity got the best of me. Claire texted, I know you're angry, but please, I need you to understand, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I thought we were just in a rough patch. I never wanted it to get this far. Please, let's just sit down and talk about this. We can fix it. I stared at the message for a moment, feeling a mix of anger and frustration bubble up inside of me. Fix it? There was nothing to fix. She had made her move, and I'd made mine. She had to understand that this wasn't just some temporary spat where we could go back to the way things were. But then, something in her message hit me, something about her tone, the way she worded things. It felt off, like it wasn't just about making peace. It felt like desperation. Maybe she realized the mistake she'd made in thinking I was going to let her walk all over me. Or maybe she was trying to find a way to salvage what was left of the situation. Either way, I wasn't going to fall for it again. I typed back, slowly and deliberately, I'm not interested in talking right now. I think it's better if we just let things sit for a while. I'm done trying to fix something that you've broken beyond repair. Don't contact me again unless it's about the divorce. I had sinned, and for a moment, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had finally stood up for myself, something I hadn't done in so long. But in the back of my mind, I knew that this was just the beginning. The storm wasn't over yet. Claire wasn't going to give up that easily. She had the kind of resolve that could only be matched by a woman who thought she could control everything. Now that I had thrown a wrench in her plans, I was sure she would do whatever it took to get back on top. And honestly, I was ready for it. It didn't take long for Claire to hit back. The next day, I got a call from my lawyer. Apparently, she had already started taking steps to file the paperwork for the divorce. I wasn't surprised. She was moving quickly, probably assuming I would just cave in. But this was different. I wasn't going to be the one left picking up the pieces. I met with my lawyer to go over the situation. He had already reviewed my financial moves, and his advice was simple: stick to the plan, keep everything secure, and let Claire make the first move. I wasn't going to make things easier for her. No settlements. No negotiating. She had wanted the divorce, and now she had to deal with the consequences. But as the weeks went by, things started to escalate in ways I didn't expect. Claire was pulling out all the stops, playing the victim card, trying to paint me as the bad guy. She had already told some of our friends about the divorce, framing it as if I was the one who gave up on our marriage and didn't care enough to fight for us. The number of messages I got from people who were sympathetic to her was getting out of hand. I knew it was just her attempt to gain support, to make me seem like the villain. But it was getting old. I could see how she was trying to paint me as the monster while she played the wounded woman, and frankly, it was annoying me a lot. One afternoon, I got a call from an old friend of hers. This wasn't a friend of mine, just someone Claire had stayed close to over the years. The conversation started out civil enough, but quickly took a turn when she started asking about the divorce. She seemed to know way too much about Claire's side of things and kept pushing me to do the right thing. Look, Oliver, I don't know what's going on between you two, but Claire's been struggling. She really doesn't want this to get messy. You should think about the bigger picture. There are things you don't know. I wasn't about to be manipulated into some guilt trip. Thanks for the advice, but I'm good, I said, cutting her off. I don't need to be reminded of Claire's struggles. You know, it's funny. Everyone keeps talking about her side of things, but no one wants to hear what I've been dealing with for years. There was a pause on the other end, and I could practically hear her squirming. Listen, but I hung up before she could continue. I had no intention of letting anyone guilt trip me into backing down. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deep Claire's manipulation ran, and how many people she had convinced that she was the one in the right. But I wasn't about to let her drag me down any further. That night, Claire tried calling me again. I had the call forwarded to voicemail. When I checked it later, the message was a lot more urgent than I expected. Oliver, please, I need to talk to you. You don't understand what's happening here. If you keep going like this, it's going to get a lot uglier than either of us wants. I'm begging you, please, just let's sit down, talk, and figure this out before it gets out of hand. I could hear the desperation in her voice. She was unraveling. And while I was tempted to call her back and rub her nose in how little I cared anymore, I knew the best thing I could do was keep my distance. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Claire was just getting started. The next few days were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and dealing with a growing number of friends and family who had started picking sides. Claire's strategy of playing the victim seemed to be working wonders, and I could feel the pressure building. Every time I checked my phone, I had a new message or voicemail, all asking me to reconsider, to sit down with her and hash things out. Most of them were from people I didn't even really talk to that often, people who had only ever heard one side of the story. And it wasn't just the calls. Claire had also started sending me texts, trying every possible angle to get me to budge. The first few were typical. Please, let's talk. This is tearing me apart. And I never wanted it to get this far. But over time, her messages started to take on a more manipulative tone. Claire texted, "You're breaking my heart, Oliver. You know how hard this is for me. I don't know how much longer I can keep up this facade." I couldn't even stomach the irony of it. She was the one who'd planned this from the start, but now, I was the one being painted as the bad guy. It was like she had forgotten how many times she'd used me as a pawn in her life, always playing the part of the poor, misunderstood wife, while I was stuck doing the heavy lifting. The audacity was mind-boggling. And then, there was the moment I had been half expecting. She finally made a move that wasn't just playing the emotional card. She reached out through her lawyer. I'll admit it took me by surprise. I'd been expecting her to drag things out longer before trying something more aggressive, but she didn't waste any time. The letter from her lawyer arrived in the mail one afternoon, and when I opened it, my stomach sank. It was an ultimatum of sorts. She wanted to settle the divorce quickly, but with an obvious twist. She was demanding more than half of everything I had. The letter included a breakdown of the assets she was claiming she was entitled to: the house, the car, a significant portion of my savings, and a share of my business. In her eyes, I was supposed to just hand it all over because, according to her, I was the one who had destroyed our marriage. It was a clear attempt at a power play. Claire thought she could push me into a corner and make me surrender, but that wasn't going to happen. I had worked hard for everything I had, and she was going to have to face the reality that she wasn't going to walk away with everything. I immediately forwarded the letter to my lawyer. When I spoke to him, he wasn't surprised. He'd anticipated that Claire would try something like this. He advised me to stay firm, to keep the assets secure, and to let the courts decide. But as I listened to his calm, methodical voice on the phone, I felt a knot in my stomach. I wasn't just fighting for my financial stability anymore. I was fighting for my dignity, for the right to stand my ground after everything she'd tried to pull. As the days passed, Claire's actions became more erratic. She started showing up at my office, accidentally running into me at the grocery store, trying to get me to talk. Each time, I remained distant. I wasn't giving her the satisfaction of any kind of emotional response. But each encounter left me feeling more and more like I was in some twisted game, with her playing me like I was a pawn. One afternoon, as I was leaving my office, I spotted Claire across the parking lot. She was standing there, waiting for me, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes sharp. I paused for a moment, trying to decide whether to just get in my car and drive away. But before I could move, she approached me. "Oliver," she said, her voice almost too calm. "We need to talk. I'm not going to let you get away with this. You can't just shut me out forever." I stopped walking and looked at her. I had been waiting for this moment, knowing it was only a matter of time before she tried something like this. She was done pretending to be the victim. Now, it was all about getting back what she thought she deserved. "I'm not shutting you out," I said coolly. "I'm just not giving you what you want anymore. You don't get to walk away with everything, Claire. That's not how this works." Her face flickered with surprise for a moment, then she scoffed. "You think you can beat me at this game? You're so much more naive than you look." Her words were like a slap in the face, but I held my ground. "I don't know if I can beat you, but I'm not going to let you in easily." Claire took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. "You know, I've been thinking about this. If I wanted, I could really make your life awful right now. I could drag you through the mud, ruin your reputation, and make sure you lose everything. Don't think for one second that I don't have the power to do that." My heart skipped a beat. Her tone wasn't just threatening, it was full of malice. She wasn't just talking about the divorce anymore. She was talking about ruining me, about making sure that even if I came out ahead financially, I would lose in every other sense of the word. I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about control. And she wasn't about to let go of that without a fight. I took a deep breath, the weight of the situation settling on my shoulders. "You don't scare me, Claire. You're not the first person to try and destroy me, and you won't be the last." For a moment, she just stood there, glaring at me, the silence hanging thick between us. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away. Her footsteps echoed in the parking lot, but I didn't watch her leave. I was done looking over my shoulder. But I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Claire wasn't going to stop until she had everything or until she saw me broken. And that scared me more than anything, because I knew, deep down, that she would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. It's been a few months since that heated parking lot encounter, and I have to say, things have taken a complete turn. What seemed like the beginning of a long, exhausting battle ended up being something far simpler than I could have imagined. After that conversation with Claire, I remained firm in my position. I followed through with the legal process, and despite her best efforts to drag me into a long, messy divorce, everything moved relatively quickly. Her lawyer tried to push for a settlement, claiming I owed her for the years she'd spent supporting me and that I should pay her spousal support for the emotional damage she'd suffered. I mean, I couldn't help but laugh at that one. Support? Damage? After everything she'd done, she really thought I was going to just roll over? My lawyer and I kept things professional, sticking to the facts. There was no infidelity on my part. I hadn't done anything that justified her attempts to take more than half of what we had. The assets I'd moved had been carefully documented, and my business was protected. The house was also no longer on the table because, by the time the divorce was finalized, Claire had lost any claim to it. Throughout the process, Claire's attitude shifted dramatically. At first, she kept up the facade of the wronged wife, reaching out to mutual friends, even going so far as to tell them that I was ruthless and heartless, that I had destroyed her life. But I didn't engage with any of it. I stayed focused on my own life, making sure to take care of myself and push forward with my business and personal goals. A few weeks into the divorce proceedings, Claire's financial demands became more desperate. She sent a last-ditch email demanding a larger settlement, threatening to go public with all these fabricated stories about me and our marriage. She even implied that she'd keep my reputation in the dirt for the rest of my life. I didn't even respond. My lawyer handled it, reminding her of the reality. If she wanted to drag this out, she would risk walking away with nothing at all. And that's exactly what happened. After her final legal threats fizzled out, Claire realized that no matter how much she wanted to fight, she had no leverage left. Her lawyer advised her to settle for the few remaining assets she could claim, basically a fraction of what she initially thought she could take. No house, no business share, no spousal support. The only thing she walked away with was a small sum from the sale of some personal property, and even that barely covered her legal fees. The moment she realized the game was over, I could almost hear the air leave her lungs. She had spent months trying to manipulate me, trying to make me feel guilty, but in the end, she was left with nothing. Watching her face fall when she realized that I had outsmarted her was, well, let's just say it was satisfying. Her reputation, too, had taken a massive hit with everyone who saw through her act. The people who had sided with her slowly started pulling away once they saw the full picture. As for me, life's been great. Not just good, but great. I'm still running my business, and it's actually been thriving more than ever. I've managed to invest some of my resources into new ventures, and my financial situation is stronger than it was during the marriage. More than that, I've been spending time on things I care about. I've rekindled old friendships, taken a few trips that I'd always put off, and found peace in ways I hadn't thought possible. I finally have the freedom to do what I love without the toxic weight that Claire brought to the table. But beyond all of that, I feel lighter. I've learned a lot from this whole experience, especially about trust and self-respect. The most important lesson? Never let anyone dictate your worth or control your future. I'm in a much healthier place, mentally and emotionally, than I was in that marriage, and it feels like I'm living the life I should have been living all along. As for Claire, well, things didn't exactly go the way she thought they would. I heard through the grapevine that she's struggling. She's been hopping from one job to the next, none of them sticking, and her financial situation isn't great. She doesn't have the lifestyle she envisioned for herself, and from what I've gathered, she's still holding on to the bitterness that once fueled her plan to ruin me. It's kind of sad, honestly. She still hasn't really taken any accountability for what she did, and it's clear she's got some unresolved issues. But as far as I'm concerned, that's her burden, not mine. She doesn't get to drag me down with her anymore. So yeah, I'm in a much better place. Things have settled down, and while I'm not jumping into any new relationships right now, I've got time on my side. I've got my peace, my happiness, and a life that's no longer dictated by someone else's manipulations. In the end, I guess the universe had a way of balancing things out. She tried to use me, but it was her who ended up with nothing. And me? I'm thriving.